Week 17 of the NFL season is officially here, so in today's video, let's go ahead and try and predict every single game of week number 17. But if you guys enjoy, hit the like and subscribe button, but let's hop into it. So because of the holidays, I'm recording this video a little bit in advance, so unfortunately, the Wednesday games that you guys have already seen, I haven't seen as of when this video is being made. So because that, I'm not going to go into too much detail about the Wednesday games because the games have already been played for you guys. I'll just give a bit of a prediction for both. For the Chiefs-Steelers game, I do think the Chiefs will ultimately win the game. If George Pickens does go out there and play, it does make it a bit more interesting, but I do think the Chiefs will ultimately come on top. I'm going to predict something along the lines of like 28-24 in favor of the Chiefs. And then for the Ravens versus Texans, by the way, these are two awesome Christmas games, but for the Texans versus the Ravens, I think the Ravens right now are just playing a better brand of football. Sure, they have some defensive issues right now, but Houston is without their top two wide receivers or two of their top wide receivers and just have so many other issues. So I'm going to pick the Ravens to win 30-17. So again, I apologize. Those Wednesday games have already been played for you guys, but again, I'm kind of pre-recording this because of the holidays. Then we have our Thursday game, which comes out today, which is going to be the Seattle Seahawks and the Chicago Bears. This is a game with two teams that are, in my opinion, very talented teams, but just aren't 100% clicking right now. For Seattle, obviously, they're trying to maintain pace and trying to find a way to win the division, though they're going to need a couple things to go their way, whereas for the Chicago Bears, at this point, you're just kind of fighting for pride and a paycheck. The good thing for the Bears is that Caleb Williams has looked pretty good the past couple weeks, and I do think that will continue versus a Seattle team that, in my opinion, isn't the greatest defensive team. With that all said, though, one team is clearly a better coached and just a bit more talented of a team, and that is, in my opinion, the Seattle Seahawks. With Geno Smith leading the way, I do think they will find a way to win this one because, in my opinion, he's a really good quarterback, whereas for the Bears, they're just not playing good football right now, even though I do think Caleb is playing good. It's just the rest of the team isn't, so I'm going to pick the Seattle Seahawks to win 30-20. Moving over to the LA Chargers versus the New England Patriots, the Chargers are coming off a pretty impressive victory over the Denver Broncos, where a lot of things didn't really go their way in the game, but they still found a way to win. It was an impressive showcase versus a really good Denver Broncos team, and I do think it will continue into this game versus New England. One team is just a little bit more talented and has a really solid defense, and I think ultimately that Patriots team will put up a fight, but I don't think there's a realistic path for them to win this game. To be honest with you, the only way that I think Drake May and the Patriots could really win the game is if Drake May just goes out there and goes berserk, but that Chargers defense is really good. Justin Herbert's playing at a high level. Even though I don't expect a very high scoring game, I do expect the Chargers to pull this one out. I have the final score 20-14. Moving on to the Cincinnati Bengals versus the Denver Broncos. This is a very interesting matchup between two teams that are both trying to fight for playoff positioning. Obviously, the Bengals have a very narrow path, but they do have a somewhat realistic chance of making it in, though it's going to be pretty difficult. It's going to need the Denver Broncos to have it basically a big time collapse. With that said, though, I think the Bengals can win this game. They have the offensive personnel, and even though I do think the Broncos present a really difficult challenge defensively, I do think the Bengals could find a way to win this one. But going back to what I said, I do think the Denver Broncos have the defensive personnel to really match up well with Jamar Chase and T. Higgins and all those guys. I do expect the Bengals to get their points, but at the same time, I expect the defense to potentially create some turnovers and make some big time plays. And with that being said, I think that the Broncos offense will also be pretty functional in this game like they've been the past several weeks. The offense for Denver is really clicking. Bo Nix is playing at a high level, and I think against this Bengals defense that isn't very good, I could see that Broncos offense having a ton of success. So unfortunately, I say unfortunately because I want the Bengals to win because I want to see them make the playoffs, but unfortunately for Bengals fans, I do think the Broncos will find a way to win this one. In my opinion, they just have a better defense, and I think they'll be able to create enough stops, though I would not be surprised one bit if Cincinnati were to win. Moving over to the Arizona Cardinals versus the LA Rams. Unfortunately, with the Arizona Cardinals losing to the Carolina Panthers this week, they unfortunately have no shot at making the playoffs, but they do have a pretty good opportunity here to play a little bit of spoiler for their division. Obviously, the LA Rams are trying to win the division over the Seattle Seahawks, so if a team like the Arizona Cardinals were to step up and beat the LA Rams, I think it opens up the division quite a bit. This is an interesting matchup because despite the fact the Cardinals are eliminated from the playoffs, I still think they're a very good team that is pretty good coached. They're maybe lacking in terms of the personnel and overall talent compared to the LA Rams, but I still do think the Cardinals are really going to give this team a run for their money. The last time we saw the LA Rams was versus the Jets, and I thought the LA Rams had a pretty subpar game, especially on the offensive end. And truth be told, even defensively, the Jets were able to have a lot of success against that defense. It just didn't result in a bunch of points. Even though the Cardinals are coming off a disappointing loss versus the Carolina Panthers, I do think they're going to come into this game trying to play spoiler, trying to be, the pest of their division, and honestly probably trying to piss off the LA Rams. I don't expect the Cardinals to come out flat. I think they'll come out there and play their hearts out. Whereas for the LA Rams, you got a lot of things on this one, so I think there's going to be a lot of pressure on McVay and Matthew Stafford. I'm tempted to pick the Arizona Cardinals because they're more than likely going to be the more loose team, and I do think they're playing maybe a little bit better than the LA Rams, at least this most recent week. But ultimately, I do think Matthew Stafford will find a way to win this one. This game is just way too important for them to lose, so I will pick the LA Rams to win this game. I have the final score 30-27. Moving over to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers versus the Carolina Panthers. Last time we saw the Carolina Panthers, they were beating the Arizona Cardinals. Last time we saw the Buccaneers, they had a really disappointing loss versus a actually pretty decent Cowboys team, at least in recent weeks. For the Buccaneers, obviously the goal is to try to win the division, and if they're going to do so, this is basically a must-win game. It kind of feels like from here on out, every single game is a playoff game for the Buccaneers. With the Atlanta Falcons starting Michael Penix Jr. and having a little bit more momentum at the moment, I think this is a big opportunity for the Buccaneers to really put a stranglehold on the division, and if they can do so versus, in my opinion, a Panthers team that's playing pretty good football, I think it'd be pretty impressive. Bryce Young has been impressive these past 6 or 7 weeks at this point. He's looking like the guy they drafted first overall, and that team is playing with a lot of passion, a lot of heart, and that's really nice to see, especially for a team that's only going to win like 5 games this year. I was very disappointed with what I saw from the Buccaneers. I thought they had a pretty decent game plan versus the Dallas Cowboys. It just didn't execute or didn't play at a high enough level, especially defensively, and it just felt like the Dallas Cowboys were just playing a little bit harder. I don't think that will be an issue in this one, though. I do think the Buccaneers will find a way to win this one. Obviously, the last time these two teams played, it went to overtime, and it was a very close game, but I expect this time the Buccaneers will pull away towards the end of the game. I have the final score 28-20. Then we move over to the Buffalo Bills versus the New York Jets. Again, I thought the New York Jets kind of outplayed the LA Rams in a lot of different regards. It just was sort of the margins and them just not executing when they needed to that kind of costed them the game. Whereas for the Buffalo Bills, they're coming off a bit of a weird game versus the New England Patriots where they did not play their best brand of football but still was able to find a way to win. This is a really interesting matchup. Obviously, the Bills have a lot to play for, whereas for the Jets, there's basically nothing to play for at this point. The Jets are just trying to maybe play spoiler in terms of the Bills trying to make the number 1 seed or the number 2 seed. So pretty good opportunity here for the Jets, but ultimately the Bills are just a different team on a different mission that is just playing at a much higher level. I will say Josh Allen's injury does give me a little bit of pause, but I just feel very confident about this Bills team, even if they don't have a 100% Josh Allen. If they can get something out of James Cook, which I think they will win this one. I don't think it'll be a blowout, but I think they'll win pretty comfortably. I have the final score 27-24. Moving on to the Indianapolis Colts versus the New York Giants. The Indianapolis Colts still have a path to make the playoffs, but it is very, very slim of likely happening. In fact, I actually kind of like the Bengals' chances a bit more than the Colts. That's just simply because I don't really know if I can trust this Colts team to win out even against these bad teams. With that said, though, the Giants are just a god-awful team. They're clearly tanking with Drew Lock starting. I mean, they are, in my opinion, the worst team in the NFL, at least as of today. They just gave up 34 points, and a lot of them were because of how bad the offense performed. Even though I have a hard time trusting Anthony Richardson, he did play pretty dang well last week. It wasn't a perfect game, but I thought for the most part he took care of the football, and obviously we all know what Jonathan Taylor did to that defense last week. I expect a similar type of performance here from the Indianapolis Colts. I expect Jonathan Taylor to play pretty well, and as long as Anthony doesn't throw like 5 interceptions, they're going to find a way to win this one. I have the Indianapolis Colts winning 20-17. Moving on to the Las Vegas Raiders versus the New Orleans Saints. This is another one of these games for the Raiders where they probably don't want to win this game. Fortunately for them, the Saints are a better opponent this week than they faced last week in the Jacksonville Jaguars. With that said, the level isn't that much better. The Saints are also one of the worst teams in the NFL currently. So because of that, I expect a game that is very ugly, probably a lot of turnovers, a lot of punts, a lot of penalties. These are two of the worser teams in the NFL. Even though I do think the Saints are slightly better, I still do think the Raiders will be able to put up a fight. But ultimately, I think the Raiders are going to probably try to lose this game because they're trying to tank for Shador or Cam Ward. So because of that, I do expect the Saints to win because the Saints are still relatively trying at least. I think the final score will be something along the lines of Saints winning by like 14 to something like 10. I think it's going to be a really low scoring game. I have the Saints winning 14 to 10. Then another one of these games where I don't think either team really wants to win, and that's between the Jacksonville Jaguars and the Tennessee Titans. Right now, the Jaguars are basically tanking for Travis Hunter, whereas for the Tennessee Titans, they're basically tanking for whatever pick they can get. Both these two teams are just as equally bad as the Raiders and the Giants. These are some of the worst teams in the NFL, and yet again, I expect a bunch of punts, a lot of turnovers, a lot of just really bad play, and it's probably going to be a lot of ugly stuff, but it should be pretty entertaining to watch. With that all said, though, I do believe that the Tennessee Titans are just a slightly better team. They were able to make the Colts game a little bit uncomfortable late in the game, and I do think the Colts are a pretty solid team. The Titans have a decent defense that I think could slow down Mac Jones and the Jaguars' offense, which won't take much to slow them down because they frankly suck. As long as Brian Thomas Jr. doesn't take over the game, I do think the Tennessee Titans will find a way to win this one, so I have the Tennessee Titans winning 24 to 20. Then we move over to the Cleveland Browns versus the Miami Dolphins. The Browns are kind of one of those teams that is also tanking at this point. They're trying to potentially tank and get a high enough draft pick to where they can take one of the top quarterbacks of this year's draft, whereas the Miami Dolphins are kind of in that meddling pack where they can make the playoffs, but it's very unlikely, but they're still going to at least try. So because that, I don't think this one takes a whole bunch of explanation. The Browns do have a decent defense, but eventually the Dolphins offense will put enough points on the board. I don't expect an upset here. Dorian Thompson-Robinson is just not a good quarterback, at least starting quarterback. So I'm going to pick the Miami Dolphins to win 27 to 13. Next up, the Dallas Cowboys versus the Philadelphia Eagles. Obviously, an NFC East rivalry game here, so this game should be pretty interesting, especially because the Dallas Cowboys are playing some pretty good football as of lately, which might not be a good thing for the Cowboys. Whereas for the Eagles, obviously they're coming off a pretty unfortunate loss to the Washington Commanders. I'm not 100% sure if Jalen Hurts will play in this game. I would expect him to, but it's not a 100% sure thing that it's going to happen. So I'm going to make this pick with the assumption that Hurts does play, but in case that he doesn't play, then I'll probably project the Cowboys to beat the Eagles if Kenny Pickett is the starting quarterback. But because I do think Jalen Hurts will be there, that's just going to open up so much more for that Eagles offense. I do expect Saquon to have a pretty good game versus somebody he's had a lot of success against. I think the Eagles offensive line and weapons will also play well. I just don't think the Cowboys have enough on either side to really keep this game terribly close, though I don't expect a blowout. I'm going to have the final score 34 to 24. Moving over to the Green Bay Packers versus the Minnesota Vikings, a very, very interesting and very important game for both these teams. Obviously, both these two teams are fighting for seeding at this point, whereas obviously the Minnesota Vikings are trying to compete against the Detroit Lions to potentially take the #1 seed within the division. This game has a lot of things going for it, a lot of really good players, and truth be told, I kind of think this is a 50-50 game. It could kind of go either way. For me, the big question is which team is going to have more turnovers. I think the team that has more turnovers is probably going to lose the game. I think this is one of those games where the margins will figure out the victor of this game. If one team struggles on 4th down, struggles on 3rd down, has a bunch of penalties, and has some turnovers, that team is obviously going to lose. So I think it's just going to be one of those games where both offenses are playing pretty well, both defenses are creating a couple stops. It's just going to come down to which team takes care of the ball a little bit better and which team execute better. To me, again, it's a 50-50 game. Jordan Love's been playing some really good football lately, so has Sam Darnold. So we've seen these quarterbacks have some turnover issues this year, but right now they're both playing some really good football, so it is a very interesting game. With that all said, I think I'm going to edge this one out to the Green Bay Packers. They've just looked a little bit better lately, and for the Minnesota Vikings, they just had a bunch of really close calls, a bunch of one-score games, so I'm going to pick the Green Bay Packers to win, though I think it's going to be a really fun game. I had the final score 34 to 30. Moving over to the Washington Commanders versus the Atlanta Falcons. For the Falcons, kind of similar to the Buccaneers, every single game at this point is a bit of a playoff game because they're obviously going to try to win the division. This one, though, is actually a really tough game and honestly could be a potential wildcard game that we see in a few weeks. For the Washington Commanders, you're coming off one of your most impressive and probably most thrilling wins of the season against the Philadelphia Eagles, which ultimately led to the elimination of the Cowboys and the San Francisco 49ers. So obviously the Commanders are coming off a little bit of a high, whereas for the Atlanta Falcons, this team also is coming off a bit of a high now because of what we've seen from Michael Penix Jr. In his debut game, he wasn't necessarily asked to do a whole bunch. He was just really playing with good precision, good timing, wasn't making any mistakes, didn't have any crazy turnovers. He did have one pick, but it wasn't his fault. They also dominated the New York Giants with the ground game. I don't expect them to be able to do so versus this Commanders defense because they are much better than the New York Giants. The Commanders are a legit playoff team that I do think is a really tough team to beat, and I just don't know if that Falcons team is going to be able to do so. You're kind of asking a lot of a young rookie quarterback who's developing and learning to go out there and beat a playoff team in just his second start. Again, I thought he looked like a really good quarterback. He played very well in his rookie debut, so we will take that into consideration, but ultimately, I just think Jaden Daniels is playing some really good football. Also, another little storyline here, you got Penix versus Jaden Daniels, another rookie clash. Ultimately, I think Jaden Daniels will win the game. I have the final score 26-23. And lastly, our Monday Night Football game between the Detroit Lions versus the San Francisco 49ers. Got a bit of a hot take here. And maybe this isn't a hot take. I got the Detroit Lions absolutely smoking the crap out of the San Francisco 49ers. San Francisco is just playing some really ugly football. A lot of injuries, very poor play. Wouldn't be shocked if Kyle Shanahan loses his job, even though I don't think he should. Whereas for the Detroit Lions, obviously the injuries suck, but I just think they're going to come into this game with just so much fire because of what happened last year in the playoffs. They're going to come into this game trying to take the kneecaps off the 49ers. I don't think this game will be even close. I kind of expect a similar game to the Lions versus the Cowboys in this type of game. I think the Lions are going to dominate from start to finish. I just have that gut feeling. I'm going to pick the Detroit Lions to win like 46-12 or something along those lines. Yeah, like 46-12. Real quick, let's just give a quick little summary of everything. As you can see right here, this is my predictions for all the video. Also check out my record, not too shabby. But if you guys enjoyed, hit that like and subscribe button, and I love you guys. Peace.